The dust cloud rose like a golden curtain against the setting sun as Sara Jenkins drove the last of the cattle toward the holding pen, her throat raw from shouting, and her muscles burning with exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She had been working for $3 a week on the Patterson spread outside Placerville, California, since late spring of 1878, and now, as autumn approached, she wondered how much longer her body could endure the relentless labor that paid barely enough to keep her fed. The work was hard, the hours brutal and the pay insulting, but jobs for women in the Sierra Nevada foothills were scarce, and beggars could not afford to be choosers. She slid from her horse, a borrowed mare that belonged to the ranch, and leaned against the fence post to catch her breath. Her shirt clung to her back with sweat, and her hands ached from gripping the reins all day. The other hands had already retired to the bunkhouse, leaving her to finish the work alone as they often did. They resented her presence, a woman doing what they considered man's work, and made no secret of their disdain. "Miss Jenkins," a deep voice called from behind her, startling her from her thoughts. She turned to find Marcus Dawson, the owner of the neighboring Diamond D Ranch, sitting astride a magnificent black stallion. He was a tall man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. His ranch was the largest in the county, prosperous and well-managed, while the Patterson spread where she worked was slowly failing under poor leadership and mounting debts. "Mr. Dawson," she acknowledged, straightening her spine despite her fatigue. She had seen him at a distance several times over the past months, but had never spoken directly to him. Ranch owners did not typically converse with hired hands, especially female ones earning pennies. He dismounted with easy grace and approached the fence, his gaze sweeping over the cattle she had just penned. "I have been watching you work these past few weeks," he said without preamble. "You handle cattle better than most men I have employed over the years." Sara felt heat rise to her cheeks, though whether from pleasure at the compliment or discomfort at being observed without her knowledge, she could not say. "Thank you, sir. I do my best." "Your best is considerably better than what Patterson deserves for $3 a week," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of disgust. "I know what he pays you. The whole county knows he exploits his workers." She stiffened at his words, pride warring with the truth she could not deny. "It is honest work." "Honest work deserves honest pay," Marcus countered. He removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Jenkins, if you will hear me out." Sara's heart began to pound. She had learned to be wary of propositions from men, especially when she was alone and vulnerable. "I am listening," she said carefully, gauging the distance to her horse. "I need a partner," Marcus said, and the words were so unexpected that Sara could only stare at him. Not a hired hand, not a foreman, but a true partner, someone who knows cattle, who understands the land, and who is not afraid of hard work. Someone I can trust to run the Diamond D alongside me. "You cannot be serious," Sara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Marcus replied. "I know you are out here finishing work while grown men sit by the fire. I know you gentle spooked cattle with patience instead of force. I know you have been sleeping in the barn because Patterson will not give you proper quarters. And I know you are worth far more than what you are being paid." Sara's mouth went dry. The offer was beyond anything she had dared to dream, yet it made no sense. "Why would you offer partnership to someone like me? I have no money to invest, no land, nothing of value." "You have skill," Marcus said simply. "You have dedication, and you have something most people lack, integrity. I have watched you return strays that wandered onto Patterson's land when you could have easily claimed them for yourself. I have seen you doctor sick calves on your own time. Those qualities are worth more than gold to me." The sun had dipped below the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sara struggled to process what she was hearing. Partnership meant ownership, meant a say in decisions, meant security she had never known. It also meant tying her fate to this man she barely knew. "What would you expect in return?" she asked, needing to understand the full scope of his offer. "Your expertise with the cattle, your commitment to the ranch, and your honesty," Marcus said. "I would draw up legal papers giving you a 25% stake in the Diamond D. You would live in the main house, in your own quarters of course, and draw a full partner's share of the profits. In exchange, you would work alongside me to build the ranch into something great." 25%. The number spun through Sara's mind like a whirlwind. It was more than generous, it was life-changing. "I need time to think," she said, though every fiber of her being wanted to scream yes immediately. "Take all the time you need," Marcus said, settling his hat back on his head. "But know this, Miss Jenkins. I do not make offers lightly, and I do not play games. If you accept, you will be treated as an equal partner in every sense. If you decline, I will respect your decision and we need never speak of this again." He mounted his horse with fluid ease and tipped his hat to her. "Think it over. When you have decided, you know where to find me." Sara watched him ride away into the gathering darkness, her mind reeling. She had come west after her parents died of fever 2 years ago, leaving her alone in the world at 20 years old. She had worked every job she could find, from laundry to cooking to finally ranch work, always scraping by, always struggling. And now this stranger offered her partnership, offered her a future beyond mere survival. Sleep eluded her that night as she lay on the thin blanket in the barn loft. The other hands snored in the bunkhouse, a privilege denied her because Patterson claimed it was not proper for a woman to sleep among men, yet he saw no issue with her sleeping in the barn like livestock. The injustice of it had long since stopped surprising her. Women were expected to know their place, and that place was rarely one of comfort or fairness. By dawn, Sara had made her decision. She completed her morning chores with mechanical efficiency, then approached Patterson as he sat on his porch drinking coffee. "I am giving my notice," she said without preamble. "I will work through the end of the week, then I am done." Patterson's face reddened. "You ungrateful girl, I gave you work when no one else would hire a woman." "You gave me work because I would accept starvation wages," Sara corrected, her voice steady. "And I am grateful for the opportunity, but I am moving on." She did not wait for his response, simply turned and walked back to her duties. The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. The other hands alternated between mocking her and speculating about where she would go. She ignored them all, focused on finishing her obligations. On her last day, Sara collected her meager wages and packed her few belongings into a worn saddlebag. She had purchased her horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, with savings carefully hoarded over months. He was not much to look at, but he was hers, and that meant everything. The ride to the Diamond D Ranch took less than an hour. The property sprawled across prime grazing land, with a sturdy ranch house built from timber and stone, a large barn in excellent repair, and corrals that spoke of careful maintenance. Cattle dotted the landscape, healthy and well-fed. It was everything Patterson's failing ranch was not. Marcus emerged from the barn as she approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. His expression remained neutral, but she saw a flicker of something, hope perhaps, in his eyes. "I accept your offer," Sara said, dismounting, "if it still stands." A smile spread across Marcus's face, transforming his features from handsome to something that made Sara's breath catch. "It stands," Come inside. We have much to discuss. The interior of the ranch house surprised her. She had expected the sparse, utilitarian furnishings of a bachelor, but instead found comfortable furniture, curtains on the windows, and books lining shelves along one wall. It spoke of a man who valued comfort and education, not just profit. Marcus gestured for her to sit at a large wooden table and retrieved a folder of papers. "I had my lawyer draw these up," he said, spreading documents before her. "Everything is as I promised. 25% ownership, equal say in major decisions, and a fair share of all profits. I want you to read every word before you sign." Sara took her time reviewing the papers, sounding out the legal language slowly. Her education had been basic, but her mother had ensured she could read and write. The terms were exactly as Marcus had stated, with no hidden clauses or conditions that would put her at a disadvantage. "This seems fair," she said finally. "More than fair." "Then we have a deal," Marcus said, offering his hand. She shook it, his grip firm and warm. "Welcome to the Diamond D, partner." The first weeks tested Sara in ways she had not anticipated. The physical work was actually less demanding than at Patterson's ranch because there were enough hands to share the load. Instead, the challenge came from earning the respect of the existing workers and learning the full scope of ranch management. Marcus proved to be a patient teacher, including her in every decision from which pastures to rotate to how much to invest in new breeding stock. He treated her opinions with genuine consideration, sometimes agreeing, sometimes offering alternative perspectives, but never dismissing her input as less valuable because of her gender. "The key to successful ranching is thinking 3 years ahead," he explained one evening as they reviewed the books in his study. Their study, Sara reminded herself, still adjusting to the idea of ownership. "Every decision we make today affects our position down the line." Sara studied the neat columns of figures, impressive in their organization. "You keep meticulous records," she observed. "My father taught me that," Marcus said, a shadow crossing his face. "He built this ranch from nothing, and he taught me everything about running it before he died 3 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Sara said softly. "He would be proud of what you have built here." "I hope so," Marcus replied. He always said that land and cattle were important, but people were what truly mattered. He treated his workers fairly, paid them well, and they respected him for it. I try to follow his example. As autumn deepened into winter, Sara found herself settling into a rhythm she had never experienced before. She had her own room in the ranch house, a space with a real bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. She took meals with Marcus, and they fell into easy conversation about the ranch, about books they had read, about their dreams for the future. She tried not to notice how her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps in the morning, or how her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally brushed while reviewing papers. This was a business partnership, she reminded herself sternly. Marcus had offered her opportunity, not romance, and she would not complicate their arrangement by developing feelings that could never be reciprocated. But Marcus was making it increasingly difficult to maintain that professional distance. He had a way of looking at her when she spoke, giving her his complete attention as though her words were the most important thing in the world. He laughed at her observations about the cantankerous old bull they were considering selling, and his laugh was warm and genuine, reaching his eyes and creating creases at the corners that she found utterly charming. The first snow came in early December, dusting the landscape in white and bringing with it new challenges. Several head of cattle had wandered into the higher elevations and needed to be brought down before the weather worsened. "I will take a crew up tomorrow," Marcus announced at breakfast. "We should be back before dark if the weather holds." "I am coming with you," Sara said, and though he looked as if he might protest, he simply nodded. They set out at dawn with 4 ranch hands, riding into the foothills where pine trees stood like sentinels against the gray sky. The temperature dropped as they climbed, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sara pulled her coat tighter and focused on the task ahead. They found the cattle scattered across a high meadow, 15 head that had wandered far from the main herd. Rounding them up took hours of patient work, guiding the stubborn animals back down the mountain trails. Sara worked alongside the men, her skills evident as she anticipated the cattle's movements and positioned herself to block potential escape routes. They were halfway down when the weather turned. Snow began falling in earnest, thick flakes that reduced visibility and made the trail treacherous. Marcus called a halt, his face serious. "There is a line shack about a mile west," he said. "We need to shelter until this passes." "It is too dangerous to continue." The line shack was a small, rough cabin used by ranch hands during roundups. It offered basic protection from the elements but little else. They crowded inside with the horses secured in a lean-to shelter nearby. The cattle would have to fend for themselves, as pushing them further in these conditions would be suicide. Marcus got a fire going in the small stove while the ranch hands spread bedrolls on the floor. Sara stood by the window, watching the snow fall with increasing intensity. They could be trapped here for days if the storm did not break. "Do not worry," Marcus said, appearing at her shoulder. "We have enough supplies to wait it out, and the cattle will drift down on their own once the storm passes." "I am not worried," Sara said, and realized it was true. She felt safe here, even in the midst of a blizzard, because Marcus was with her. That realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, as natural as breathing. The storm raged for 2 days. The ranch hands played cards and told stories while Sara and Marcus took inventory of supplies and discussed plans for spring breeding. In the close quarters, Sara became acutely aware of every aspect of Marcus. The way he moved with unconscious grace, the timbre of his voice when he spoke softly to avoid disturbing the others, the strength in his hands as he added wood to the fire. On the second night, unable to sleep, Sara slipped outside to check on the horses. The snow had stopped falling and stars blazed overhead in a sky swept clean by the storm. The world seemed hushed, waiting, beautiful in its frozen stillness. "Cannot sleep either?" Marcus asked, joining her in the lean-to. "Too much quiet," Sara said with a small smile. "Strange as that sounds." "Not strange at all," Marcus replied. He checked the horses with practiced efficiency, running his hands over their legs to ensure they had suffered no injury from the cold. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Sara asked, genuinely surprised. "For accepting my offer," Marcus said, turning to face her. "For taking a chance on this partnership. The ranch has never run better, and that is largely because of you." "We work well together," Sara agreed, her heart beginning to race. "We do," Marcus said softly. He took a step closer, and Sara could see her breath mingling with his in the cold air. "Sara, I need to tell you something, and I hope it will not make things awkward between us." "What is it?" She whispered, though she thought she might already know, might already hope with every fiber of her being. "This started as a business proposition," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "But somewhere along the way it became more than that for me. You have become more than that. I look for you the moment I wake. I save up observations throughout the day just to share them with you at dinner. And I know I have no right to feel this way, that you came here for partnership in business, not for some rancher to complicate things with his feelings, but I cannot keep silent any longer." Sara's breath caught in her throat. "Marcus, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted quickly. Your position here is secure regardless of how you respond. I would never use our business arrangement to pressure you. I just needed you to know." "You did not let me finish," Sara said, finding her courage. "I was going to say that I have been fighting the same feelings for months. I thought I was being foolish, that you could never see me as anything other than a business partner. I convinced myself that I was grateful for the opportunity and confused it with something deeper." "And now?" Marcus asked, hope blazing in his eyes. "Now I know the difference," Sara said. "Gratitude does not make my heart race when you enter a room. Gratitude does not make me memorize the sound of your laugh. Gratitude does not make me dream of a future that includes more than just cattle and contracts." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "I am going to kiss you now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If that is not what you want, tell me to stop." "Do not stop," Sara breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and perfect. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, filled with promise and passion and the sweetness of finally giving in to feelings too long denied. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day you rode up to the ranch and told me you accepted my offer." "You hide your feelings well," Sara said with a shaky laugh. "I had no idea." "I was trying to be professional," Marcus admitted. "Trying to give you space to settle in without pressuring you. But Sara, I have to tell you, these past months of restraint have been some of the hardest of my life." They stood together in the lean-to, arms wrapped around each other, and Sara felt a peace she had never known. This was where she belonged, not just at the Diamond D Ranch, but here in Marcus's embrace. The business partnership had been a gift beyond measure, but this love that had grown between them, was something precious beyond words. The next morning, they made their way back to the ranch, the cattle ambling down the mountain ahead of them. The ranch hands noticed the change between Sara and Marcus immediately. The way they rode side by side, the soft looks they exchanged, but the men were wise enough to keep their observations to themselves. The winter months that followed were the happiest of Sara's life. She and Marcus continued to run the ranch as equal partners, but now their evenings were spent in front of the fire, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck. He courted her properly despite already having won her heart, bringing her wildflowers that somehow survived the snow, reading to her from his collection of books, teaching her to dance in the empty barn while humming waltzes. "Marry me," Marcus said one evening in late February as they stood on the porch watching the sun set. The words were not a question but a statement of intention, of hope, of a future he wanted to build with her. "Yes," Sara answered without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in early spring of 1879 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Placerville. The ranch hands attended, along with a few neighbors, and the townspeople who had come to respect Sara for her skill and determination. She wore a dress of deep blue silk, purchased with money she had earned as a full partner, and carried a bouquet of wild roses. As they exchanged vows, Sara reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been herding cattle for pennies, sleeping in a barn with no prospects beyond grinding poverty. Now she stood as an equal partner in a thriving ranch, about to marry a man who loved and respected her, with a future bright with possibility. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted into the night. When the last guests finally departed, Marcus swept Sara into his arms and carried her across the threshold of what was now truly their home. "My wife," he murmured against her hair. "My partner, my love, my everything." "My husband," Sara replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "My best friend, my greatest adventure." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a coming together that felt like the natural culmination of months of growing love and desire. Marcus was gentle and patient, ensuring Sara's comfort and pleasure above his own. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Sara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Marcus asked immediately, concern flooding his features. "No," Sara assured him, wiping away the tears. "I am just happy. Happier than I ever thought possible. Sometimes the magnitude of it overwhelms me." "I know exactly what you mean," Marcus said, pulling her close. "I feel the same way every time I look at you and realize you are real, that you chose me, that this is our life now." As spring turned to summer, they fell into new rhythms as husband and wife. The ranch prospered under their joint leadership, expanding their herd and their land holdings. Sara proved to have a gift for negotiating sales, often getting better prices than Marcus had previously managed. He learned to defer to her judgment on such matters, secure enough in himself to recognize her superior skill. In the evenings, they would sit together reviewing the day's work and making plans for the future. They spoke of eventually hiring more help so they could travel, of starting a breeding program for horses in addition to cattle, of 1,000 dreams they could now pursue together. "I want children," Sara said one night as they lay in bed, her head resting on Marcus's chest. "Someday, when the time is right, I want to fill this house with the sound of little feet." "Someday soon, I hope," Marcus replied, his hand stroking through her hair. "I think you would be an amazing mother." "And you would be a wonderful father," Sara said. "Patient and kind, teaching them to love the land and respect others." They tried in earnest after that conversation, but months passed without Sara conceiving. She tried not to worry, but as autumn approached again, she could not help the anxiety that crept in. What if she could not give Marcus the family he wanted? What if her years of hard labor and poor nutrition had damaged her ability to bear children? "Stop torturing yourself," Marcus said one evening, reading her troubled expression with the ease of long practice. "If we are blessed with children, we will be grateful. If we are not, we will still have each other, and that is more than enough for me." "You say that now," Sara said quietly. "I will say it always," Marcus countered firmly. "Sara, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "You are not a broodmare whose only value lies in producing offspring. You are my partner, my wife, the love of my life. Children would be wonderful, but they are not the foundation of my happiness. You are." His words soothed the worst of her fears, and Sara resolved to stop dwelling on what might never be and instead appreciate the blessings she already had. She threw herself into ranch work with renewed vigor, helping Marcus prepare for winter and planning their strategy for the following year. It was a cold morning in November when Sara woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before losing the contents of her stomach. Marcus found her sitting on the porch steps, pale and shaking. "Should I fetch the doctor?" he asked, alarm clear in his voice. "I do not think that will be necessary," Sara said slowly, a wondering smile spreading across her face. "Marcus, I think I might be pregnant." The doctor confirmed her suspicion 3 days later. Sara was indeed expecting, likely due to deliver in late June or early July. Marcus was beside himself with joy, picking Sara up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her sick again. "I am going to be a father," he kept repeating, wonder and delight in every syllable. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Sara suffered terrible morning sickness well into her second trimester, and her normally boundless energy flagged. Marcus fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, until Sara had to remind him that she was pregnant, not ill. "I will not take chances with your health," Marcus said stubbornly. "You and this baby are the most important things in the world to me." "And the ranch," Sara teased, "can burn to the ground for all I care if it means keeping you safe," Marcus replied, dead serious. Sara learned to accept his protectiveness, recognizing it as an expression of love rather than an attempt to control her. She modified her activities, taking on more administrative work and less physical labor, though she refused to stop riding entirely until her growing belly made it impractical. As spring arrived and then summer, Sara grew increasingly uncomfortable. The baby seemed determined to kick her ribs at all hours, and sleeping became nearly impossible. Marcus would rub her aching back and fetch her whatever odd foods she craved at strange hours, never once complaining about the disruption to his own rest. Labor began on a sweltering July afternoon. 2 weeks passed when the doctor had predicted. Sara was in the garden when the first contraction hit, strong enough to take her breath away. By the time Marcus found her 20 minutes later, she was gripping the fence post and breathing hard. "It is time," she managed, and Marcus went into immediate action, sending a ranch hand for the doctor and helping Sara into the house. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning, 18 hours of pain that tested Sara's endurance to its limits. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until she thought she might break his fingers, wiping her face with cool cloths, and murmuring encouragement even as she cursed him for putting her in this condition. Finally, as the sun climbed high in the sky, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at the transition. The doctor laid the baby on Sara's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature with absolute wonder. "We have a son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," Marcus repeated, his own voice thick with emotion. He pressed kisses to Sara's forehead, her cheeks, her lips, whispering how proud he was, how strong she had been, how much he loved her. They named him Matthew Daniel Dawson, after both their fathers. Little Matthew had dark hair like Marcus and what promised to be Sara's green eyes. He was perfect, and Sara fell in love all over again, this time with the tiny human they had created. The first months of motherhood challenged Sara in ways ranch work never had. Matthew was a demanding baby, wanting to nurse constantly and sleeping only in short stretches. Sara walked the floors at night, exhausted and sometimes near tears from frustration and lack of sleep. Marcus helped as much as he could, changing Matthew's napkins, walking him when he fussed, and taking over ranch duties entirely so Sara could focus on their son. He never once complained about the upheaval to their lives, seeming to genuinely delight in every aspect of fatherhood, even the less pleasant ones. "You are a natural at this," Sara observed one evening, watching Marcus gently rock Matthew to sleep. "I have a good teacher," Marcus replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. "You amaze me every day, Sara. The way you have taken to motherhood while still managing to keep your hand in ranch operations, the way you balance it all, I am in awe of you." As Matthew grew, he proved to be a happy, inquisitive child who loved the ranch and everything on it. By his first birthday, he was toddling after Marcus, wanting to be wherever his father was. Sara would watch them together, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. The ranch continued to thrive. Word spread about the quality of Diamond D cattle, and buyers came from as far as San Francisco to purchase breeding stock. Sara's reputation as a shrewd negotiator grew, and other ranchers began seeking her advice on herd management and sales strategies. "You have become quite famous," Marcus teased one evening after a neighboring rancher had spent an hour picking Sara's brain about breeding programs. "Notorious, more like," Sara replied with a laugh. A woman who dares to have opinions about cattle and business. I am sure the town gossips have plenty to say about me. Let them talk, Marcus said, pulling her into his arms. You have earned every bit of your reputation through hard work and intelligence. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me. When Matthew was 2, Sara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter arrived in the spring of 1883, it was after a labor that lasted only 6 hours. Much better than last time, Sara said breathlessly as the doctor handed her the baby. I could get used to this. Let us not get too ambitious, Marcus said with a laugh, though his eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked at his daughter. She is beautiful, Sara, just like her mother. They named her Sophie Me, and she proved to be Matthew's opposite in temperament. Where he was energetic and rambunctious, she was calm and thoughtful. Where he charged headlong into every situation, she observed carefully before acting. Together they were a perfect balance. The years flowed by in a blur of activity and joy. Matthew grew into a strong boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything he could about ranching. Sophie showed an early aptitude for numbers, and would sit with Sara reviewing the account books, her small face serious as she tried to understand the columns of figures. Sara and Marcus made good on their dream of traveling, taking the family to San Francisco one summer and to the Grand Canyon another. They expanded the ranch further, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and diversifying into horse breeding as they had once discussed. Through it all, their love only deepened. They still worked as equal partners, still made every major decision together, still stole moments alone whenever they could. The passion between them had not dimmed with time and familiarity, but rather had evolved into something richer and more profound. Do you ever regret it? Sara asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Matthew and Sophie were inside, arguing over a game as children did. Offering partnership to a woman you barely knew instead of finding a more conventional business arrangement. Never, Marcus said without hesitation. That day I rode over to Patterson's ranch and watched you work. I knew you were special. I told myself it was just about your skill with cattle, but I think even then I recognized something deeper. You were exactly what I needed, what the ranch needed, what my life needed. I was herding cattle for Pennies, Sara said softly, still marveling at how far she had come. Sleeping in a barn with no prospects beyond surviving another day, and you offered me the world. We offered each other the world, Marcus corrected, taking her hand. You gave me as much as I gave you, Sara. You gave me partnership, companionship, love, and family. You made the Diamond D into something greater than I could have achieved alone. You made my life complete. Sara leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment washing over her. I love you, Marcus Dawson. Every single day I love you more than the day before. And I love you, Sara Dawson, he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. My partner, my wife, my heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, Sara thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had been a young woman with nothing, working for wages that barely kept her fed, with no family and no prospects. She could have died in obscurity, just another forgotten soul who struggled and failed in the harsh Western territories. Instead, she had been given an opportunity by a man who saw her value when others saw only her gender. She had taken that chance and built a life beyond her wildest dreams. She was a successful rancher, a respected businesswoman, a beloved wife, and a devoted mother. She had everything she had ever wanted and so much more besides. The sound of the screen door opening pulled her from her reverie. Matthew and Sophie tumbled out onto the porch, their argument apparently resolved. Papa, will you tell us the story about when you and Mama first met? Matthew asked, climbing into Marcus's lap despite being almost too big for such things. Again, Marcus asked with mock exasperation. I must have told you that story 100 times. But it is the best story, Sophie insisted, settling herself on Sarah's lap. Tell us again, please. Sara and Marcus exchanged amused glances. The children never tired of hearing how their parents had met, how Marcus had offered Sara partnership, how they had fallen in love while building the ranch together. Very well, Marcus said, adjusting Matthew on his knee. It was the autumn of 1878, and I was riding past the Patterson spread when I saw the most remarkable sight. A woman, working alone to pen cattle while the hired hands sat idle. She moved with such skill and determination that I could not look away. As Marcus continued the story, embellishing details for the children's entertainment, Sara felt Sophie's small hand slip into hers. She looked down at her daughter's upturned face and saw trust and love reflected there. This was her legacy, she realized. Not just the ranch or the business success, but this family they had created, these children who would grow up knowing that hard work and integrity mattered, that women could be equal partners in all aspects of life. That love built on respect and mutual admiration was the strongest foundation of all. The years continued to pass. Matthew grew into a fine young man who took over more and more ranch operations as Marcus began to slow down. Sophie married a schoolteacher from Sacramento, a kind man who treated her as an equal partner in their life together, just as she had seen her parents do. They moved into a house in town but visited the ranch frequently, eventually blessing Sara and Marcus with grandchildren. Sara and Marcus grew old together, their hair turning silver but their love remaining constant. They still rode out to check the cattle when weather permitted, still made decisions about the ranch together, still stole kisses when they thought no one was watching. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Sara back to the spot where they had first kissed, the old line shack in the foothills. It had been maintained over the years, kept as a functional shelter for ranch hands caught in bad weather. You remember? Marcus asked as they stood outside in the summer sunshine. I remember everything, Sara said, slipping her arm through his. I remember the terror and the hope I felt. I remember thinking you were either crazy or the answer to prayers I had been too afraid to voice. I remember the exact moment I knew I loved you. When was that? Marcus asked, though she had told him before. When you kissed me and then pulled back to look at me with such tenderness, such reverence, as though I was precious beyond measure, Sara said. In that moment, I knew you truly saw me, all of me, and loved what you saw. I did, Marcus said softly. I do, I always will. They renewed their vows that day, there in the shadow of the line shack with only the mountains as witnesses. It was a private moment between two people who had built a life together, from nothing more than a business proposition and mutual respect that had blossomed into enduring love. Years later, when Sara's health began to fail, she faced the prospect of mortality with the same courage she had shown throughout her life. She had lived to see her grandchildren grow, had seen the ranch prosper beyond anything she and Marcus had dreamed, had experienced a love that poets wrote about but few people truly found. I have no regrets, she told Marcus one evening as they sat together in the room they had shared for over 4 decades. Not a single one. My life has been everything I could have hoped for and more. You cannot leave me yet, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I need more time with you. I will always need more time. You have been the great adventure of my life, Sara said, taking his hand. From that first day when you offered me partnership to this very moment, you have been my constant, my love, my home. Promise me you will not grieve too long. Promise me you will keep living, Keep enjoying the ranch and our children and grandchildren." "I promise to try," Marcus said, though they both knew it would be a promise hard to keep. But Sara had raised him to be strong, and when she finally slipped away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, surrounded by the family she loved, Marcus honored her memory by continuing to live fully. He still rode out to check the cattle, still made decisions about the ranch with input from Matthew, still told stories about the remarkable woman who had been his partner in all things. He lived another 5 years, long enough to see Matthew's children begin to take on ranch responsibilities, long enough to know that the legacy he and Sara had built would continue for generations. And when his time came, he went peacefully, a smile on his face, perhaps dreaming of a young woman herding cattle with skill and determination, of an offer of partnership, of a love that had transformed both their lives. The Diamond D Ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's leadership and eventually passed to his children. The story of Marcus and Sara became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. A portrait of them hung in the ranch house, painted when they were in their prime. Marcus stood tall and proud, his hand resting on Sara's shoulder as she sat in a chair, both of them looking directly at the viewer with expressions of quiet confidence and joy. Below the portrait, a small plaque read, "Marcus and Sara Dawson, partners in life and love, founders of the Diamond D Ranch. She was herding cattle for pennies. He offered her partnership instead. Together they built an empire and a family that will endure for all time." And endure it did, a testament to what could be achieved when two people came together as equals, when love was built on respect and mutual admiration, when a chance was given and accepted with courage and hope. Their story became more than just family history. It became inspiration, proof that the most unlikely partnerships could create the most beautiful legacies. The ranch hand still spoke of Sara with reverence, remembering her skill and her fairness. The townspeople of Placerville remembered her as the woman who proved that gender was no barrier to success in ranching or business. And her family remembered her as the heart of their clan, the woman who had loved fiercely and lived courageously, who had taken a chance on a man who saw her worth when others saw only limitations. In the end, Sara's journey from herding cattle for pennies to becoming one of the most respected ranchers in California was more than just a success story. It was a love story, the kind that proved true partnership was possible, that respect and admiration could blossom into enduring passion, that two people working together could achieve more than either could alone. The Wild West was a harsh and unforgiving place, especially for women, but Sara had carved out her own path with determination and skill. And when Marcus had offered her not just employment but true partnership, he had given her more than opportunity. He had given her the chance to become everything she was capable of being. In return, she had given him a love that lasted a lifetime and a partnership that built something enduring. Their story lived on in the land they had worked, in the cattle that bore their brand, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. It lived on in the values they had instilled: hard work, integrity, treating people fairly, and never underestimating anyone based on their circumstances or gender. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, ranch hands swore they could see two figures riding the fence line together, checking on the herd one last time before dark. Whether it was truly the spirits of Marcus and Sara, or simply tricks of light and shadow, no one could say for certain. But the story persisted, a fitting tribute to two people whose love had been as vast and enduring as the land itself. whose partnership had created something that would outlast them both, whose choice to take a chance on each other had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. The Wild West had been tamed, the frontier had closed, but the legacy of Sara and Marcus Dawson remained, a reminder that the greatest adventures often began with a simple offer of partnership, and that the truest love was built on a foundation of respect, equality, and the courage to see potential where others saw only limitations. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love immortalized not just in memory, but in the living, thriving legacy they left behind.